experience when you're speaking at an association that has completed its 92nd year, has seen India through all its various hues, pre-democracy to democracy, to a period of industrializations under the license Raj, to liberalization and now to globalization. Indeed, it is truly a privilege for me to be here. I must say that I don't normally talk about the fact of women in the business and work life, but anytime people tell, as you know, I spent 33 years in ICICI, people used to comment a lot to me about women in the service sector, women in banking, and we all used to lament the fact that there are not enough women in the manufacturing sector in India. So you can imagine how delighted I was to be greeted by the president of the federation. Not only is she she's a flag bearer of women in the manufacturing sector, but she's heading a great 92-year-old association. So I'm indeed very delighted to be here. I was asked to speak on the global economy. As you all know, the global economy just now has such dark and threatening clouds around that I took somewhat of a liberty in adding the word India within that, because this is a bright spot that all of us want to talk about. This is a great Indian story that you and I are part about. So I thought rather than just focusing on the problems of the global world, particularly the developed world, I will talk about that because you'd asked me to, but I'm also going to talk a fair amount about India. So I have a short presentation. I'll promise not to be too verbose on this, and actually be happy to take questions from you guys. So clearly there is moderation ahead. These numbers are the GDP numbers for the global economy. If at all the events of the last 15 days to a month would have moderated the outlook even more. As you know, 2009 was the big recession year where you had a degrowth. But even in the years to come, we are talking about barely a 3% growth really for the global economy. So indeed, a challenging time really for the global economy. And if you look at a breakdown of this thing, one can ask ourselves that are we seeing the first signs of bottoming out? Clearly, you will say that the events of a potential Greek default, further stress in the Eurozone does not in any way signal a bottoming out. But if you look at the various components there, as you know, emerging markets is a positive story there. Even within emerging markets, emerging Asia has been really the greatest driver of growth. We are seeing some signs of that growth tapering compared to the elevated levels of its contribution. So it's a call. Current call appears to be that by the middle of 2012, you will have actually seen the bottoming out and probably the overall growth trajectory should resume. So one would say that what is the situation now? As you know, if I was making this presentation to you a year ago, one would have not talked about a gloomy global economy because the year indeed started well. In fact, a lot of the economists said that the growth that you've seen in the first half is relatively muted, second half is going to be much stronger. And now, as you know, we are all probably staring at an abysmal fourth quarter kind of a growth. And what really triggered it? Of course, the Middle East crisis and what that did to the oil prices was one impact. But the Eurozone's problems, which we thought was solvable, we were dealing with the Euro periphery, and that is something that would be solved, actually just exasperated day by day. So are you dealing with a Greek problem? Are you dealing with some unique problem that one can find a solution to a liquidity issue that we find in countries like with very large economies like Italy, Spain, and that in itself is proving quite challenging. You might say that 2008 in some ways actually looked worse, because you were threatened at that time with the seizure of the entire financial markets. But it was the US government that had to take a lot of steps, and they very proactively dealt with that. So yes, one might argue about the size of the bailout that they gave at that time and what did it ultimately achieved, but there was a very, very proactive response to that. It was a single government that was tasked with that responsibility. You're dealing with a multitude of countries here who have to get a political buy-in for whatever the solution is. And that's why the problem is quite challenging. In a scenario like this, as I said, the second half, and particularly the fourth quarter, looks abysmally bleak. The revised forecast, I showed you that slide in terms of the forecast, so that you know what the forecast numbers look like. Numbers coming out of China, the PMI numbers that are being tracked, which is, as you know, a lead indicator, again seems to suggest some moderation overall in terms of the growth numbers. So that's another kind of a challenge that we're facing, because China, as you know, was the biggest driver. The only country which achieves a growth better than India is China. And if you're seeing now some moderation, because it's extremely, it has a large consumption market, but it also has a significant exposure in the form of its exports to the developed markets. And what impact slowdown there is going to create in China is again another worry that's to reach out. So September, as you all know, we are in the last week of September. It proved to be a crucial month on the EU. You would have all read reports coming out of the Fund Bank meeting where the only agreement, I'm told, that was reached was that we need to agree to something. So rather than sitting out and figuring out what is it that we need to do for the December payment that Greece needs to make, everybody agreed that it's time for us to sit and figure this out. And that's not saying much in an environment like this. So that indeed everything that one would have thought about September played out without any solution in sight. And the imbalances are becoming a major problem. As you know, large parts of the developed world today are borrowers. It is the surpluses that are being generated by the public sector in the emerging markets, more notably China, Russia, Brazil, India, and some of the other Southeast Asian countries, which is indeed buying the bonds, the sovereign bonds, which are being issued by the US and some of the other better rated sovereigns. And it is the private sector money. So the big silver lining in the developed world is the fact that corporates are making a lot of money. And there is some amount of saving pickup that has happened in those markets as well. That is why the amount of private investment flows are actually going more and more towards emerging markets, because that's where the growth is. But just given the huge trade surpluses that some of the other countries in the emerging markets are running, you're seeing a reverse flow of their investing into public debt. But this imbalance is here to stay, it's not going to be so. All of this, where does it lead us in terms of potential growth? And what our economists did is, rather than just track real GDP growth, they said, let's look at it on the basis of nominal GDP versus real GDP. As you know, in India, the inflation numbers are quite high, so the nominal GDP numbers actually look. I unfortunately didn't have enough time to do it, but an interesting other chart we could have looked over here is purchasing power parity in that context. As you all know that we just overtook Japan, and therefore on a purchase power parity have now emerged as the third largest economy. But even the real GDP, nominal GDP paradigm shows you that it's India, China, and Russia, which is right up there, the classic big story. I thought before we really come to talk about India, I don't know how many of you have seen this slide. This is my most favorite slide. This is the Angus Madison slide, which basically shows world GDP over the last 2 millennia. And I'm sure some of you may say this didn't come as a surprise to me, but the green color that you see there, I hope all of you can see it at the back, is India's contribution to the world economy. And until the Industrial Revolution, in fact, it was really India, followed by China, that was the biggest contributor to the world's economy. And it's only the Industrial Revolution and the fact that we were an occupied country at that time that actually the growth dropped dramatically. Again, what's heartening to know is the trajectory of the Greens' contribution and, of course, the Blues' contribution going forward. So any story about what's likely to happen, I think this is a great chart to say that certainly, I don't know whether we get to what we were pre the Industrial Revolution, but certainly it's going to be one of the biggest drivers of growth. So in that context, I thought let's just talk about the Indian economy. Now, all of you know that the services sector is a very large part of India's economy. What I think we don't focus on enough of as a nation, that we are very unique in this. Because in the development phase of an economy, the big drivers are industrial production. It's only when per capita incomes reach a certain level that you have a huge demand for services coming in. And therefore the service sector becomes a big part of an economy. India is very unique in this, and that's why I thought it would be interesting to look at it in the context of, people talk about China, India, almost in one breath, not China or India. But in that context, you see how very different our economy